The disaster you are about to consider has already happened. In pieces, a drought. In one country, a heat wave. In another, a flood. In a third, each one. On its own, the world absorbed. This scenario asks one question. What happens the year they all happen at once? Several of the world's great grain-producing regions have failed in the same season. Not one breadbasket. Several at the same time. This is scenario 0. Today, could you survive a global harvest failure? The world is fed by a surprisingly small number of places, a handful of regions, great plains of fertile soil and reliable climate produce the majority of the grain that the entire planet eats. These regions are often called breadbaskets: wheat, corn, rice, soy, the staple crops that provide most of humanity's calories, come overwhelmingly from these few productive zones. The global food system connects them through trade. When one breadbasket has a poor year, the others cover the shortfall. A bad harvest in one place is balanced by a good harvest somewhere else. This balancing act is the quiet machinery that has kept the world fed. But that machinery depends on one assumption. It assumes the breadbaskets fail independently, one at a time, in different years. The scenario today is what happens when that assumption breaks, when several breadbaskets fail together in the same single year. For the global system to work, breadbasket failures must stay uncorrelated. So the real question is, what could make several of them fail at the same time? The answer is the atmosphere. The world's weather is not a set of separate local systems. It is one connected system. Large-scale patterns in the atmosphere and the oceans can influence the weather in several breadbaskets at once. When the jet stream locks into an unusual pattern, it can deliver drought to one continent and a heat wave to another. In the same season, large ocean climate cycles can tilt the odds of bad weather across several regions. Simultaneously, the breadbaskets are far away from one another. The atmosphere that governs them is not, and a warming climate raises the stakes. It makes extreme heat more frequent and more intense. It makes droughts deeper and floods heavier. It does not, by itself, guarantee a multiple breadbasket failure, but it loads the dice. It makes the simultaneous bad year more likely than it has ever been. The honest framing is this: a multiple breadbasket failure is not exotic. It does not require an asteroid or a supervolcano. It requires only ordinary weather disasters, the kind the world already sees every year, arriving by bad luck and a tilted climate in the wrong places all at once. Like the pandemic and the conveyor collapse, this scenario has no single hour zero. It builds across a season, but unlike those, its timeline is sharp because a harvest happens on a schedule and a failed harvest is known within months. Month 1 to 3, the harvests come in and the numbers are bad from several regions. At once, grain markets respond immediately. Prices, which depend on expected supply, begin to climb sharply. This is the first signal, and it travels worldwide in days. Month 3 to 5. Governments react. Some grain exporting countries, facing their own shortfalls, restrict or halt their exports to protect their own people. This is a natural response, but it has a brutal effect. It removes grain from the world market exactly when importing nations need it most, month 5 to 7. The crisis divides the world sharply. Wealthy countries can still afford grain at high prices. Their citizens face higher food bills and hardship, but not famine. Lower income countries that depend on imported grain face something far worse. For them, high prices mean their people cannot afford to eat. Month 7 onward. In the hardest hit importing nations, the food crisis becomes a humanitarian emergency. Hunger spreads, and history shows what often follows: a sharp food crisis, unrest, instability, and large movements of people in search of food. To understand how long this lasts, you need one fact about the world's food at any given moment. Humanity holds only a few months' worth of grain in storage. The system is not built on a deep reserve. It is built on next year's harvest, arriving on time. When several breadbaskets fail, the world draws down those stored reserves to cover the gap. For a single bad year, this can work. The reserves cushion the blow, but it empties the global pantry. And an empty pantry means there is no cushion left for the year that follows. This is the pivot of the entire scenario. If the following year's harvests recover, the world refills its reserves. Prices ease, and the crisis, though it caused real suffering, passes. One hard year, survivable globally, though gravely unequal. But if the following year also fails, if the tilted climate delivers a second bad season before the reserves refill, then the world faces a food crisis with no buffer at all. That is the difference between a hard year and a true global catastrophe. It hinges on whether the breadbaskets recover in time. This is the honest scale. A single-year breadbasket failure is a survivable global emergency, brutal and unequal, but survivable. A multi-year failure is one of the most serious catastrophes this channel covers, because food is the one need that cannot be deferred. How does the world recover from a harvest failure? The first answer is simply the next good harvest. Agriculture is resilient. A single failed year does not damage the soil or the farms permanently. Given normal weather, the breadbaskets produce again. But recovery is more than one harvest. The reserves must be rebuilt, and that takes not one good year, but several, because the world must grow enough to eat and a surplus to store until the global pantry is refilled. The food system remains fragile, and the human recovery is the slowest of all. A severe food crisis leaves deep marks: economic damage, political instability, displaced populations, and a generation in the hardest hit regions marked by a year of hunger. Grain refills a silo faster than a society heals. This is why resilience matters so much. For this particular scenario, the world cannot easily prevent a bad weather year, but it can hold deeper reserves. It can diversify where food is grown. It can keep trade open in a crisis rather than closing it. The harvest is chance. The buffer is a choice. So, the question this episode has promised to answer: could you survive a global harvest failure? For most people in wealthier nations, the honest answer is yes, but it would mean a year of higher costs, scarcity, and disruption. And preparation makes that year far easier to weather. First, Build a real food reserve. This is the scenario where a deep pantry matters most directly. Not a few days, a genuine reserve of staple foods. That store, well, rice, dried beans, grains, cooking oil, a household, with several weeks to months of staples, is insulated from the worst of the price spikes and the empty shelves. Second, the familiar scenario zero kit still applies because a food crisis travels alongside economic and supply disruption, water, shelf-stable food, a hand crank radio, flashlights and batteries, a full first aid kit, a long supply of essential medication, and cash in small bills. Because in a sharp crisis, the ability to buy before others react is its own kind of reserve. Third, if you can grow something, you will not feed a household from a backyard in a single season. That is not the point. The point is resilience and skill. A garden, some preserved food, the knowledge of how to grow and store. These reduce your dependence, even slightly, on a global system. That, in this scenario, is the thing under strain. And the last thing, as always, is not a supply. It is community. And for a food crisis, it is decisive. A neighborhood that grows food together, that shares and preserves and looks after its vulnerable members, is dramatically more secure than any household alone. Local farmers, community gardens, shared knowledge. In a hungry year, the table that is shared is the table that endures. How likely is a multiple breadbasket failure of all the scenarios on this channel? This may be the most plausible of all, and that is precisely why we end the season on it. Single breadbasket failures happen regularly. The world sees them every few years. The system absorbs them. But near simultaneous failures of multiple major regions have happened before in history, and analyses of the climate system suggest the odds of such years are rising, not falling. So, the honest framing is this: a supervolcano is almost unimaginably rare. An asteroid is rarer still. But a year in which the weather turns against several of the world's breadbaskets at once is not a distant hypothetical. It is a recurring risk of the world we already live in and the preparations it asks for. A real food reserve and a resilient community are the same ones that carry you through nearly every other scenario this channel has explored. We do not run this channel to scare you. We run it because the most useful question a person can sit with periodically, calmly, without panic, is, what would I actually do? Not in theory. In the year, the harvest does not come in. If you found this scenario useful, subscribe to Scenario 0. We are going to spend a lot of time in the dark hypothetical so that, in the bright real, you are slightly more ready than you were this morning. Yes, in closing, no cadence promise.